the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation, in collaboration with the UNDP, is organizing the KnowTalks series of webinars, hosting intellectuals and knowledge experts from around the world. The webinars aims to address the most imperative knowledge and development issues, examine best practices and global experiences, as well as advise solutions to meet challenges in pursuit of the progress of nations, their sustainable development, and the well-being of their people. Titled The Role of Organizational Culture in Effective Knowledge Management, our session today will highlight the correlation between strong organizational values and cultures and effective knowledge management. And to discuss this topic, we are honored to have Ron Young with us today. I'll give you a little bit of background about Ron. Ron Young is the founder of Knowledge Associates International, an international group of management consulting companies with a headquarters in Cambridge, UK. Ron is a leading international expert in knowledge and innovation management, specializing in knowledge-driven results for organizations, and has contributed to the production of the UK government white paper, UK Competitiveness in the Knowledge-Driven Economy. Ron also chaired the DSI Knowledge Management Standards Committee, and he lectures on global knowledge economy and teaches knowledge asset management methodologies at leading universities. He provides consulting to the UN, World Bank, European Commission, the Intergovernmental Asian Productivity Organization, APO, and he was the lead consultant for the European Commission €3 million No-Net and Liver collaborative research projects. Before welcoming Ron, a gentle reminder to please type your questions in the Q&A section, and we will try to answer them all at the end of the session. And without further ado, I welcome you, Ron, to the session. Good morning, Ron.
Good morning.
Ron, we will be talking about so many topics today, answering questions, but I wanted to start with a question to why is effective knowledge management very important today?
Right, thank you, Dima. And just before I start, may I also just quickly thank NBRF, the Knowledge Foundation, for inviting me to this first KnowTalks, which I'm very excited about, and the good work that NBRF Knowledge Foundation has been doing. I'm speaking from Cambridge today. I'm speaking from my home because I'm still in lockdown, but I'm 15 minutes away from my office, which is at St. John's Innovation Centre, where we have some very interesting startups. So when we look at what is effective KM and why is it important today, let me start with a quote, a famous quote in the UK. It comes from the past Chief Knowledge Officer of the UK National Health Service, Sir Muir Gray. He actually said, "Knowledge is the enemy of disease." And I think today, in today's COVID crisis, new scientific knowledge is really what is going to provide the solution. And we have some hopeful solutions today, of course, with the vaccines, with new knowledge creation, which was very fast. But new knowledge underpins everything we do. Just a week ago, I was reading that MIT have actually devised, following research, AI that learns the COVID cough through the audio on your phone. If you cough through it, it can actually dictate. And actually, the human ear cannot make that difference. But AI is helping us, and big data, with identifying potential for testing for COVID, which I think is very remarkable new innovation based on new knowledge. And one other example, just yesterday actually, I read that AI again has actually helped us to search very rapidly all the medicines in the world to see if there is actually a connection, a relationship. And it discovered one which has gone through clinical testings for treatment and for health. And it can cure, the claim is it can cure up to 2/3 of moderate and severe. And this has been validated by the Swedish Karolinska Institution. So I hope that's just a very quick example that new knowledge creation is important for humanity. So why is knowledge management very important today? Of course, knowledge underpins everything we do. It always has, and it always will. Knowledge, new knowledge, shapes our civilizations. So we've always managed our knowledge. There's nothing new about managing knowledge, but since the 1980s, since the 1990s in particular, we have developed for the first time in the history of humankind, new tools and new techniques to enable us to all better connect together around the planet. And that means we can better communicate together, we can better inform one another, we can better cooperate, perhaps better collaborate, learn much, much faster than ever before, turn that into new knowledge much faster than ever before, and new innovative products and services. What we're actually witnessing right now on the planet is the exponential growth in new knowledge creation globally. And part of that is the technology, of course, to connect us together. And part of that are the new knowledge management processes that can be embedded into our, if you like, into our organizational DNA. I like to call it the organizational KNA, you see. It's part of what we are and part of what we do as knowledge-driven organizations. And what this means is that these new learnings and ideas and insights, we can now capture them as they happen far more frequently before. We can store them digitally. We can share them digitally if they need to be shared. We can better protect them if we need to better protect. And as a result of that, as a result of this really rapid feedback we're getting now globally, we can turn them even faster into new insights, new learnings, new ideas. And that means faster and better collaboration and co-creation. That's what it does. New knowledge management now is new to the point that it can help us to do that. It can help us retain our critical knowledge from people who are leaving the organizations in an increasingly mobile world or retiring experts. And what it can also do is what I call, it can identify the critical knowledge assets in an organization. Knowledge is a key asset, if not the key asset of the organization. And it helps us to ultimately make better decisions, ultimately respond faster by creating this. We stop reinventing the wheel, we stop repeating the same mistakes, and we're much better able to turn our lessons learned into better changed behaviors. And we can do that across the planet, virtually. We can do that collectively, we can do that continuously, we can do that systematically, we can do that more frequently, and far more reaching than ever before. So I hope that this adequately explains what knowledge management is today and why it's so important to enable us to be able to much faster develop more innovative solutions, opportunities for humanity and smarter societies around the world. Therefore, I would argue that certainly in the case of healthcare, certainly in the case of climate change, planetary health, certainly in the case of education, we must do this, in my opinion. We must do it. And in those areas which the UN SDGs are all about, it, in my opinion, should become mandatory. So that's what's important about knowledge management today.
That's absolutely right. And you mentioned collaboration, co-creation, and that actually takes me to my second question.
Right.
What is the role of culture in effective knowledge management?
Yes, indeed. You know, some people even say, oh, knowledge management, that's a system, isn't it? Or that's a technology. What has that got to do with culture? You know, but of course, and again, if I'll quote the late Professor Peter Drucker, it was Drucker, of course, that we all know, who said famously, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture can eat knowledge management for breakfast if we don't think about it enough. And that's why, of course, many strategies in the past have failed. We need strong shared vision, strong shared values, strong shared mission and purpose. And that, of course, we all know is far more powerful than the most logical plans to achieve them. However, if we can align our culture, our values, our beliefs with the best possible knowledge management strategy, that's an unbeatable combination. That's the combination, of course, of heart and head. But having the best KM technologies, platforms, tools, methods, and techniques, although that's a marvelous development for humanity, it only gives us the potential to connect, the potential to share, the potential to collaborate, the potential to co-create. And frankly, if people don't want to do that, you can have the best strategies, technologies, and tools in the world, and they're just not going to use them. So it's all about people wanting to do this. People drive knowledge management. And people are driven by culture and values and beliefs. So that's why people as individual experts, as collaborative teams, as learning communities, they need to be inspired, motivated, feel recognized, and rewarded in the ways that we all like to be rewarded for their participation. So culture is vital. Some people have even said, I don't know how they arrive at this figure, but they've said culture is 70% of effective knowledge management. What I would say about that is that the strategies, the methods, the tools, and the technologies are critically important. We would not be able to do this form of effective knowledge management without them. But they are relatively easy to implement. Culture is a bit more difficult. And culture, what I think is important, first of all, is to say, what type of culture are we talking about? And I'd like to suggest we're talking about a knowledge-driven culture in the organization. That's what we really want, a better knowledge-driven culture. And what does that mean? First of all, I would say that above all, anything else, it's mindset. That's really what's key. I remember I had a client come to visit me in Cambridge, and this was in the 1990s. And he was very interested. He was a senior person in government, and he wanted to go back to his country and develop the right policies and the right mindset for innovation, for knowledge and innovation. He just completed a world tour, and included in that world tour was a trip to Silicon Valley. And out there in Silicon Valley, he met with lots of people in jeans and t-shirts and working in old disused railway trucks and eating in extraordinary ways, and a very, very interesting and exciting culture. And then he came to Cambridge, where we are at St. John's Innovation Centre, and it's glass buildings and people wearing shirts and sometimes ties. And he said to me, he said, I'm confused. What should I go back and do? Should we go back and buy some disused railway trucks and get people to wear jeans, or what do we need to do? And we thought about this over a cup of coffee. And of course, we came to the conclusion that they're important locally, of course, but it's mindset. If people believe they can, if people want to, if people are inspired to, then the environment, that's fine, that will follow on, that will do. And so I think mindset is very important. I think the other thing we need to realize about a knowledge-driven culture is that knowledge management is not just about sharing knowledge. I've heard a lot of people say that knowledge management is knowledge sharing. Well, of course, knowledge sharing is a key component, an absolutely key component. But to me, knowledge management is about knowing when you must share or when it's best to share, and knowing when you must protect the knowledge and the best ways to protect the knowledge. And you can do this with a variety of things. If you look at the organization's objectives, you can say, okay, so if we're going to develop a more knowledge-driven culture and more knowledge-sharing culture when it's needed, what are the key areas of knowledge that, if we really could manage them better and faster, would make a big difference to achieving our objectives, and focus on those. And then we can identify those areas and we can do a risk assessment. What are the risks of sharing this? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? And we can also look equally to the degree we need to protect. And of course, cybersecurity is very important as well. And so we start to develop, and we need in our organizations, a knowledge sharing policy, which clearly tells everybody what knowledge we must share and what knowledge we must protect, better share and better protect. And that's a foundation of the culture that will come on. But we have to recognize we come from an industrial society, and that's still with us and needs to be with us, and it plays a very valuable part in our world economy. But in the industrial economy, we have scarce resources, and industrial economics, which is about scarcity and competition. And what we're talking about here with new cultures and new values is a knowledge society where we do not have scarce amounts of information. We have too much information overload. And we need to develop our culture based on collaboration when collaboration is best, and competition when we need it. But, you know, we're talking about values and beliefs here. And when I travel around the world, I have the privilege of traveling around with workshops, I get the same question asked all the time. So why should I share my knowledge? You know, my knowledge is my value. I've spent a lot of time, I've invested many years in learning and developing my knowledge and being valuable, and you're asking me to just share it, you know? And even if I wanted to share it, I don't have the time. I have to do my job. And you're asking me now to come along and spend time, find time to share with other people my knowledge. You know, why should I do that? So in developing a knowledge sharing culture, we really, really do need to make sure that people have a much better understanding of why it's of benefit to them not just why it's of benefit to the organization. What will it mean to me? What will be better for me if I share my knowledge and if I share my ideas? And so it's really a mindset thing. It's an education thing in developing the culture. You know, it's the way we do things around here. Various things affect culture, of course. Technology does. The web appears, and that starts to change our communications culture. Mobile telephones appear, and that immediately changes our telecommunications culture. TV changed our cultures. So technology can change cultures. But in a knowledge society, in a knowledge-driven organization, a knowledge-driven culture, I think it's a combination of leadership, recognizing the values to the organization and to the individuals. And it's also about these new processes that people will have to do. You know, when I go into organizations, typically there are three paradigms. The first paradigm, which is the major one, which most people in an organization have before they embark on knowledge management, is it's a great idea, but I don't have time. You know, it's a really great idea. I love what you're telling me. It's quite inspirational, but I don't have time to even do my day work. So, you know, I don't have time. That's the normal thing, and that's quite understandable. But that's why it wouldn't happen if it's left with that sort of paradigm. And then the second paradigm, when people start to understand better the value of knowledge for themselves and the organization, and the value of sharing and the value of better protecting, they're more likely to say, I realize now it's important, it's something I should look at more closely. But that's still not going to guarantee the success. The culture's still not right. For me, the culture is right when it gets to paradigm 3. And paradigm 3 is people say, you know what, I've been looking at this. I've been looking at communicating and collaborating and co-creating and learning and sharing. And that's what I do anyway. That's my job. Knowledge management is my job. That is the paradigm we want. Knowledge management is for everyone. It's not just a department somewhere with a head and they do all of the knowledge work. And if you want any, go and talk to them. Of course, they can all have support services. But the paradigm that we're seeking, the culture we're seeking is knowledge working is the future. Knowledge working is my job, particularly in a world of robotics, and what can be automated will be automated. Anyone who's working on a job that could be automated is at risk. We have to find those things that human beings can do much better or work in parallel with. I would say that that's really important. So culture is a very, very complicated, broad area. But I would say that they're the key. I would say it's mindset, essentially, that we need to be most aware of. If we can educate to get the right mindset and people truly understand the true benefits for what they want, that's going to lead to the right culture. And if we can then link that to the key areas of knowledge in the organization that, if better managed, would achieve the objectives better, then we've developed a knowledge-driven culture. So I hope that starts to address the culture, what the role that culture plays is vital. It would fail without culture, in my opinion.
Yes, absolutely. So we've established that the culture has a vital role in effective knowledge management, and the question is, and I believe a lot of the questions in the Q&A are about how do we create a more knowledge-driven culture? I don't believe this is an easy thing to do, but we probably need to hear from you about, you know, if we are already on the way towards this effective knowledge management culture, what we need to do. And if we are just starting now, what do we need to do?
Yeah. Right. Okay. I'll try my best. How do we create a knowledge sharing culture? Some people say there are methods, tools, and techniques to change the culture, and some people say culture is the result of changing the structure, the systems, the leadership, whatever. I personally believe it's a combination of both. But if I were to think about how to start creating it, it's important to first just remind ourselves that one of the problems we have today actually is because knowledge is fragmented. Let me put it that way. When we worked in small teams, in small groups on farms or whatever, we all knew one another, we all trust one another, we might all even be family and friends, we all know. So the knowledge we all knew pretty well. If you're in a small company, if you're in a startup company, the knowledge isn't fragmented really. Everyone's typically in the same room, bunched up, and they're all collaborating and co-creating, and they all trust one another. And I'm coming to trust really in a moment. But the problem is, if you're a successful organization and it grows and you get more people, then you might put them in different rooms, or you might put them in different buildings, or you might put them in different countries around the world, which is fantastic as we expand. But as we do that, the knowledge fragments. And large companies and large institutions, in my opinion, suffer from fragmented knowledge. And what knowledge management brings is the way to connect it together and start to make that knowledge flow far more, a bit like lifeblood really in the body. So the problem with knowledge fragmentation in large organizations and institutions is that because you don't know, you can't possibly know everybody and you can't possibly know everything, then you get some doubt. And doubt, after all, is a shade of fear, isn't it? And that's where it starts to become a little more resistant. So what we learned is what we call the trust spiral. How do we get that knowledge flow back? How do we get that trust back, which tends to weaken as organizations grow and knowledge fragments as organizations grow? How do we get that back into one organization? And we understand the principles now. The principles of the trust spiral are quite simply this. As a principle, if there is adequate trust, people will start to communicate with one another. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know. I'm just going to remind you of things that we all know in our private and in our work lives. If there's sufficient trust, we will communicate with one another. And the communication may well be infrequent, it may well be one way, but as the trust builds, so our communications is more frequent, more two-way, more open rather than closed. I can walk into an organization and I can just sit and listen around and I can look at how they use emails and I can tell to what degree the communications are the ideal, which is open, two-way, frequent. As the communications improve, the trust improves. We know that, of course. And as people's trust improves, so they will start to cooperate with one another. And as that improves, they will start to collaborate with one another, co-labor, working together to achieve the same common goals. But we've learned so much more about collaborative teams now and the role they play in knowledge management and in building trust. An effective collaborative team doesn't just do the primary job, which is to achieve the objectives of that team, which is absolutely essential. But an effective collaborative team creates new knowledge faster than most other ways. You know that if you're experiencing, you're in an effective collaborative team, you're bouncing ideas off of one another, you're verifying one another's facts, you're challenging one another constructively, you're learning from one another. All of this is going on in the process of collaboration. And as we more effectively collaborate, the trust level goes up. And we're learning so much faster. And as we learn so much faster, we start to feel more confident, and we start to feel more competent. And so the trust levels goes up again. And as we are collaborating and feeling more confident and more competent and learning so much faster and creating new knowledge through that process, we start to realize that we better manage this better. This is really good. We need to find better ways to manage it. And we will even get to the stage where we value the high knowledge assets, that they're the real value in the organization. And this all leads to better creativity and innovation. So we know the principles. We know there's a thing called a trust spiral, which if we do these things, naturally, human beings want to do this. People naturally want to do it. They don't naturally resist it. Of course, there is the virtuous downward cycle if we don't do any of those things, but we've learned the importance of a trust spiral. Therefore, one of the things we believe organizations could do to start to do this is to try with a small team, a small pilot team, if you like, in the organization, to implement some of these new methods, tools, and techniques and mindset for knowledge management, and see that trust spiral in operation. Over a 6-month period, you can actually see what it was like in the beginning and what it's like at the end, and therefore the benefits for the entire organization. So that's the first thing I would say, to start to develop that. Do it by, see it by doing. Do it in a small pilot team, see that trust spiral in action. The other thing I wanted to mention, of course, was the recently published ISO standard on knowledge management. And the ISO standard on knowledge management, which was published, the first international standard for knowledge management in 2018, November 2018. That contains the principles of effective knowledge management and the key requirements in all aspects. And that in itself can help organizations initially on that journey to create that sort of culture. And because we think that culture is so important, there's even an annex in the ISO standard just on culture and the characteristics of a culture for a knowledge-driven organization. So there are a couple of things that can be done. Another thing that can be done is we learned, because a question that people ask me all around the world is that same thing. How do we create a knowledge sharing culture? You know, if it can be created, how do we do it? And I remember that several automobile manufacturers that I worked for, they started to introduce, like all manufacturers, a simple competence management system. There's nothing new about that. We're all familiar with that. And typically they have 3 levels of competence. Level 1 means I have an intellectual understanding, but no practical experience. Level 2 means I'm starting to apply. And level 3 means I'm competent. We looked at that and we saw that the more enlightened manufacturers will actually had level 4, which is not only are you competent, but you can teach others. And if you want to, you can say, I'll go to level 3 and I'm competent, but otherwise you can go to level 4 and teach others. And what they didn't realize so clearly is they created a culture of teachers. And a culture of teachers is a culture of knowledge sharing. So competence management systems have a role. Equally, a couple of words about virtual working. We have to also be clear, as we're all working more virtually now, that the culture can be challenged quite considerably by all working separately rather than together, because unless it's made really clear what your roles and responsibilities are, and you have a team contract which says how often you're going to come together, because time in culture is important. Some people check things every 5 minutes and other people come back in once a week to see what's going on. There are various things you can do like that, but I'm conscious of the time, so I'm not sure if I've got more time. So you let me know.
Yeah.
But the sort of things you can, the trust spiral, we know the natural principles. The standards will help considerably with principles and requirements, and competencies can help us with creating a culture of teaching others, coaching and mentoring, for example.
Thank you. I mean, I know you gave us a lot to think about and to consider and probably try to come up with ideas and solutions, but I know our audience and participants here are actually keen on asking questions, and we have you, so I'll jump right into some of those questions.
Okay.
So we have Muhammad Ahmed Abu Bakr is asking, what is the relationship between culture and modern education? And he's talking about technology precisely. How is culture is correlated with the technology? What is the relationship between culture and technology?
Yeah, right. Very good question, Mohammed. I think what I've been learning, of course, in a way, we've been forced through the COVID crisis, we've been forced into an accelerated digital transformation process. Whether we liked it or not, we're all working from home. As a result of that, we have now realized that some people, of course, learn very well as individuals. They're disciplined, self-disciplined. They can go online, they can go onto learning platforms. They do very well with them. And it's excellent. It really does enable totally new possibilities. But we also know that there are some people who don't learn that way, the best way. They like to learn with others. And also the, I think modern pedagogy is suggesting that we learn much faster and learn much better as learning teams and social learning. And therefore, modern education online, that which is designed, which deals with individual learning and social learning, is the best. And that works well. I've seen certain online platforms which are just for individuals that only work for the individuals and not others. So I think there is a strong relationship between culture and modern education. We need to better understand, again, trust is important. If you're disconnected in physical ways, then it's important that we have that trust and we have that ability and we have that confidence and competence to work online. So virtual skills go very hand in hand with modern education to be successful. I hope that starts to look at that anyway.
Yes, I mean, we can only agree, and we probably have a lot to learn because we just started implementing online learning for 100% immersive experiences. So I think this is going to be the year where we actually evaluate and learn. I have a question from Abbas. It's actually a very long question. I will not be able to read it all, but Abbas talking about the possibility to establish a knowledge society or knowledge management without an incubating organizational culture. So I think he's agreeing with what you said about not being able to establish a knowledge society or knowledge management culture without having an organizational culture that supports the knowledge management. Aisha Yusuf is asking about the difference between, the higher degree, the knowledge that someone with a higher degree has, and a person with an experience. Would you rather hire that one, the higher degree person, or someone with actual experience? So
right.
she's asking your preference. Which one would you choose?
Well, what I would like is the person with higher degree and experience.
Both.
I think, of course, both are incredibly important, but in the knowledge management world, we talk about data, we talk about information, big data, of course, we talk about information management. We've been talking a little bit about knowledge. I also like to talk from time to time about wisdom, not necessarily the higher philosophical wisdom, but in business, the practical business wisdom as well. And for practical business wisdom, that tends to come with experience. Not necessarily so, but quite often, if somebody is well experienced, they have that level of knowledge and experience, which is invaluable. And we know that when they decide to retire or when they decide to go to another company, we realize just how important that is. So, I wouldn't want to make the choice between somebody who's worked really, really hard and has got a higher degree and somebody who's worked really, really hard and got a lot of experience. I just think we need to recognize the two. The person with the higher degree now needs to get that experience, and vice versa.
Thank you. And we have Dr. Saada, I hope I pronounced the name right, and she wants to ask about knowledge sharing as a phase of knowledge management and its relationship to the institutional organization and planning. I think we probably answered most of that in some of what you said, but maybe if you have something to add for that question.
Yeah, yes, I think knowledge management, I would in the organization, in the institution, think of knowledge management as the need to better share when it should be shared and the need to better protect when it needs to be protected, and look at knowledge and the key knowledge areas and the key ways that we can improve them as knowledge assets. That's what I would say in the institution. Just as we have physical, tangible assets.
Absolutely. And someone is asking, Sarween, asking about knowledge management in project management office. So we're talking about specific type of company that is a project management company. How do you see knowledge management in this setting?
I'm really glad that's been raised as well, because in many organizations, as well as, of course, those that work with their business processes, many organizations are very much more project oriented and working with projects. And what knowledge management brings to project management, in my mind, is the following. Number one, before we start the project, we might discuss what is the problem, what are the objectives, what are we trying to achieve, all that normal sort of pre-planning of a project, good pre-planning. But now we can add and should add, so what new knowledge might we create during this project as a deliverable? Not just the outputs to achieve the objectives, but what new knowledge might we be able to create? And how might we do that? And in a project, every project, let's say we have weekly project review meetings. Most project teams that I've worked with, at the end of the project, which might be 6 months or 12 months or whatever, they might, and most of them do, sit down and say, let's review what we've learned and see if we can do it better next time. The problem with that is that all the best ideas, all the best insights, all the best new learnings, all the best new knowledge is created up at the beginning and you've forgotten. That's when it tends to happen. What knowledge management now does is it enables you to, in your weekly review meetings or monthly review meetings, facilitate what new learnings have we got from this that can improve the knowledge in this project? What new learnings and ideas can improve the way we do things next time? So we introduce knowledge management into project management in more frequent, continuous, systematic ways. And if you've got that knowledge plan at the beginning of what you might like to create, and if you then monitor better and capture new learnings, ideas, and insights as they happen, either at team meetings or give people tools that they can capture them individually as well, and do the reviews at the end, I would argue you have a far more richer, knowledge-driven project. And therefore, it plays an extremely important part to get effective knowledge management into project management.
I can't agree more. I mean, Education for Employment is an organization that is data-driven. So we do collect a lot of data when we implement programs. And now our monitoring and evaluation department is called Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Department. So we added the learning component to that. And I think probably this is a global trend now. All other organizations are adding the learning component to the monitoring and evaluation. Otherwise, why do we monitor and evaluate?
It is absolutely right. And we're learning every single day. And when anybody says to me, well, there's nothing new to learn, I don't need to manage it, I don't believe them, because every single day we learn new things. And
yeah, and we have a kind of a practical tip question, and someone is asking how can he convince staff to share knowledge? What is the tip for that?
Yeah, well, I can only repeat what I might have just suggested, which is the key thing in all of this is education. You can't force people to share. They will only share if they want to. There are plenty of surveys done. There was a great one done in the US, actually, where they surveyed 10,000 people on sharing, and they found only 1 in 10 naturally wanted to share because that's their personality. That's the way they are. You can't stop them. They just love sharing. Another 2 in 10 would share if they were asked by somebody. So it's only 3 in 10 that would share on that basis. 6 in 10 were very pragmatic. They said, yeah, I'll share, but I need to see the benefits. I need to see why I should do this. I need to see what it means to the organization, what it means to me. Very practical, pragmatic terms. And 1 in 10 wouldn't share ever because that's the way they are. And therefore, that suggests that the majority of people want to see why they should share, and they will share if they really understand it. Therefore, education is the only way to get people to do that. And not just say, here are the benefits to the organization, which are important, but here are the benefits for you. And this is what it means for you in your development.
And another question from Abdel Karim Darwish, he's asking about leadership. And this is a question that I actually wanted to ask you. How do you see the relationship between leadership and leading by example in knowledge sharing and knowledge management and organizational strategic objectives?
Yep, very good. I'm glad that was raised as well. Knowledge leadership, as I like to call it. Leadership, it's critical. You know, in the ISO standard I mentioned, ISO 30401 knowledge management standard, there is a section on leadership. And one of the roles that's actually in there about leadership is the role of the leader to engender, to develop trust, to create more knowledge-driven culture. And what used to be the standard critical success factors for organizations was leadership commitment. I've changed that now. I say leadership engagement and commitment. And I go back to my earlier point. Paradigm 3 is when everyone realizes knowledge management is for everyone. It's not for you. It's not just for them. It's not just for those specialists. Every single one of us should be practicing better knowledge management. So those leaders that practice themselves and demonstrate themselves clearly are the engaging leaders And that's the key role of knowledge leadership. And to create a trusting environment, and to embed the key knowledge management processes, and to make sure that the resources are available to have the best possible tools and techniques to support us.
Amazing. We have still open 17 questions that are open, so I don't believe that we will be able to get to all of these questions. So I'll try to choose the topics that we haven't discussed. So there is a question about the ISO certification. Should the organization go directly, or is it enough to have a framework in practice rather than applying for these certifications?
Great. Again, it depends on the organization. I mean, there are many organizations who value and want to be recognized for being certified to any standard, whether that's quality, whether that's health and safety or whatever. Some standards, there's a legal requirement, so you have to do it. Some standards are volunteer, and some people might want to be recognized that they have reached that level of certification, because that adds confidence and it adds confidence to the partners then, the customers and clients that they're working with. But I personally would like to remind companies that the most important thing is to apply the principles and requirements of the standard, regardless of whether you certify or not. There are good reasons to be seen to be certified, of course, absolutely. But the most important one is there are some good practices here, there are some good principles, there are some good requirements. Let's follow that first, even if we don't need to go the certification route. Let's do this for the benefits it will bring to our organization, the value it will bring.
I'll probably ask also 2 more questions, and then we wrap up the session. I have a question here from Lama, which I believe is important. How can knowledge management be maintained when there is high turnover in an organization?
Yeah. I mean, higher turnover than before is a fact of business life now. There will be high turnover and some will be very high. And because knowledge essentially is in the heads of people, and knowledge is changing in the heads of people daily, they are very, very valuable, and especially when they leave. How can we retain the knowledge really means that the organization needs a knowledge management infrastructure that perhaps has a platform, a cloud-based platform that has some key knowledge areas and some key knowledge assets and things like that, that people, and the most important thing of all, is it embeds some key knowledge management processes where people will capture their learnings, will capture their ideas, will capture their insights, will create new knowledge, collaborate and co-create. This can be better retained if, when people join and go right through the time they're with the company, we're applying the knowledge management process. You know, this idea of somebody joining who's valuable and then they leave and we have an exit interview and we sit down with them and say, tell me everything you know, is a little bit crazy, isn't it? Because you don't know what you know until you need to know it in context. And so by applying the KM process continuously through the time that person's with the organization, we're more likely to retain the critical knowledge.
Absolutely right. And Professor Ron, to wrap up, I think this has been a very informative session, and it's a now talk. So now we know, no talk, and now we know more about the topic. And I think this is an encouragement for everyone out there to consider working on their organizational culture and making sure that they have adequate knowledge management systems in place. Before wrapping up, I just want to remind everyone that we talked about how important the role of knowledge management today, and what is the role of culture in effective knowledge management, and how do we create a more knowledge-driven culture. So these were the topics that Professor Ron talked about today. I'll give you the mic for a few words to close about that topic. If you like to say a few words or to close.
I'm sorry. Yes, of course. I mean, what we've talked about today really is about a combination of people being able to connect in totally new ways with great potential to communicate, collaborate, learn, share, create new knowledge, and innovate. We have that potential, people. But we also talked about the knowledge management process that needs to be embedded in the organization to make sure that we do all of these things in a more collective, systematic, more frequent way. Capture, store, share, and apply our knowledge. And we also have these extraordinary technologies that are almost changing by the day to support us in better ways to do all of this. And the challenge is to put them together in a meaningful education, strategy for the organization to achieve its objective, policy, so we know clearly what to share and what to protect, and make sure that we do that in the best possible way, and implementation plans. And I think that that's what's the future of humanity. We haven't had an opportunity to talk about human intelligence and machine intelligence and how they need to collaborate in the future and enhance one another.
We would need a separate session for the topic, maybe.
Yes,
because it's very important and diverse.
But that's what knowledge is. As I said in the beginning, we've always managed our knowledge, and we will always manage our knowledge. But now we have so much better ways to do it. We must do it, certainly in the areas of healthcare, planetary health, and education, at least.
Thank you very much, Ron. That was a very informative session. I would like to thank all of the participants, and I'm sorry for not being able to answer all of the questions. We actually had a lot of questions for the session today, and please tune in for the rest of the talks that are taking place in the coming few days. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely day. Thank you, Ron. Have a great day.
Thank you.